Hello, everyone. I'm Sue Roseberry, and I'm the executive director for the Midland Storytelling Festival. Every year around this time, we get to have the best opportunity for enjoying stories in the oral tradition right here in Midland, Texas. This year, we're doing something a little bit different because, the pandemic brought in some changes. So we're trying to incorporate some virtual opportunities as well as in-person gatherings. This year, we're going to be talking about survival stories. And we thought we would reach out to a few of our master tellers to talk about surviving and how we have used storytelling, anecdotes, and humor to be able to get us through some rough times. And contrary to what many people may believe, the pandemic was not the first difficult time we ever faced. We're going to talk to three of those tellers, and the first of them will be Bil Lepp. He is a wonderful, imaginative, funny guy who is proud of the fact that he tells lies from Charleston, West Virginia. Would you join me in welcoming Bil Lepp? Bill, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you, Sue.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad to have you on for a little bit to talk about survival stories. How are you surviving all the changes that have happened in our world of late?
Well, Sue, let me just say first that you have some sort of popping going on with your microphone. I don't know if you hear that.
Oh, well, let me unpop. Let me see if that'll work.
Okay.
Is that better?
Keep talking.
Is that better? I'm still talking. I'm still talking.
Yeah, I think so. There's some kind of, it's like a crackling is what's happening, but only
Hmm.
when you talk.
Well, we'll see if I can figure.
Now I can't hear you at all.
Is that better?
I think it is. Yeah. Sorry.
We'll see if we can make it all work.
Okay.
Okay, on we go.
I
How have
forget.
you been surviving the pandemic?
Uh, you know, um, pretty well. The initial year, I didn't think was all that bad. I mean, of course it was bad, but we made it through real well here. And then one of the things we decided to do upstairs in our TV room, we have this giant cabinet full of board games. My kids are 21 and 18 now, so we've been collecting board games for 2 decades, and none of them ever get thrown away. So we decided last March or March a year ago that we were going to play every single one of those board games throughout the lockdown, and if we didn't like them, they were going to get thrown away. So that's how we survived the initial onslaught of the shutdown. And then when we finally got through it all, or when I thought we'd gotten through it all, like this past March, and the vaccines became readily available, then I thought everything's ready to go. And it was funny because I felt like throughout the pandemic, throughout the first year, people were just everybody was so impatient. We just want this to be over. We want this to be over. We're pushing, we're pushing, we're pushing. It was like, let's go, let's go, let's get this done. And then when things started to open up again, uh, I really felt like I'd been so impatient the whole time that I was just going to sit back and be patient and just enjoy the moment a lot more than what I had been doing for the past year. So that worked for a couple of months, and then things started to get tight again, and so now this has been a more I don't know, emotionally taxing part of the pandemic than the earlier part when everything was shut down and you knew it was going to be shut down. I could deal with that. But when stuff is still up in the air, that's where it starts to get on my nerves.
Well, I agree. And you kind of don't know what to do because there's nobody who's really in charge.
Right. And it's, we've had I had so many cancellations, obviously, early on. And then now that things are starting to open up again, there's things on the calendar. And like we were going out to Ojai, California about a month ago. And you just wonder up to the moment you're getting on the plane, are they going to email me or call me and say this? And same with your festival, just crossing fingers. It looks like we're going through with it no matter what, and I'm so excited about that. Um, but there's still this tension that is it going to happen? Is it going to happen?
Yeah, that's a big deal. And one of the things that we worry about, of course, is keeping everybody safe and making sure that everybody is able to enjoy the stories and not have any kind of backlash from it. As a boy growing up, what kind of things or hardships do you feel like you went through that you survived?
You know what, Sue? I am a white middle class man from parents who were nice and didn't get divorced. I can't I can't really
No
complain about.
hardships?
I can't play. There's not much. My dad, when I was, I guess, about 15, um, became a minister. Or no, when I was 11, he went into the ministry. So I had lived in South Charleston, West Virginia, most of my early life, and then we moved to Dayton, Ohio, and he was actually the dean at a seminary, and he did that for 3 or 4 years. And so I went to seventh, eighth, and ninth and 10th grade in Dayton, Ohio. And then I got a scholarship to go to Germany for as an exchange student for my junior year. And then while I was in Germany, really without telling me, my parents moved back to West Virginia. And so I went my senior year at an entirely different school where I didn't know anybody. Not only was I the new kid, but there was only one high school in this entire county. And so all of the kids had known each other since elementary school. So not only was I the new kid, but I was the absolutely new kid. And so I think maybe the most difficult part of my life was the fact that I went to a different high school every year that I was in high school. And not only in different parts of a city, but different states and even two different countries. So I didn't build the kind of friendships I think that a lot of people built through their high school. I know people who have friends that they've, really close friends that they've had since high school or even earlier than that. And I don't really have that. So, I mean, it didn't really like, harm me too much psychologically. But if anything was difficult in my life, that was probably the thing.
Well, we all have hardships, and don't you love it when people tell you, you haven't been through anything? I did this and I did that. You have had no worries.
Right. Well, I'm not arguing with them.
Well, you have been classic for creating scenarios that bring hardship into the mustard. Where does that mentality come from?
um, well, I grew up in a family where we all told stories, and it was always up to the listener to decide what was true. Nobody had to tell the truth in my family. Nobody was trying to trick anybody, but if you can make a story more entertaining, you were allowed to make it more entertaining.
Even your daddy, who was the preacher?
Oh, my daddy, who was the preacher, my grandfather, my grandmother, whose father was a bishop in the Mennonite church. Yes, yes, yes. And then, of course, here in Appalachia, I mean, it's probably the same in Texas too, but there's a lot of tall tales that go on. And a lot of the point of a tall tale is to be able to brag that you did something great without you ever saying you did something great. So, like, for example, there's a story where I get attacked by a mountain lion. And in order to save myself, I decide I'm going to wrestle the mountain lion, and then I'm going to preach to the mountain lion, and then I end up baptizing the mountain lion. And of course, all of this happens because I'm dumb. That's sort of the premise of all my stories. Uh, I go into these events, I'm not really paying attention to what's happening, I'm not thinking about the consequences. And then I get faced with some sort of crisis, and usually just through sheer luck, I make my way out of it. I mean, they're a lot like the Jack stories, like Jack and the Beanstalk, and all the traditional Jack stories, where Jack kind of bumbles into a situation, and then through whatever luck he has, he manages to get out of it. And I think that's why tall tales are appealing to people, because so many of us, without intending to, find ourselves in some sort of crisis. And we only have whatever means we have to get out of it. And so it's fun to see people struggle, make bad decisions, have dumb ideas, and yet still manage to eke through the situation, to survive somehow, but usually just by the skin of their teeth. So I think it's people enjoy my stories because although they're way exaggerated, I'm doing the same thing that we all do every day.
Well, are you advocating that an unassuming approach to life, I'm not going to say dumb, but an unassuming approach to life is necessary for survival?
I don't. I mean, it works for me. I've gotten pretty far in this life without doing too much planning. I'll tell you that. And it's fun for me to see, like, like other storytellers, for example, who come to a festival. They get their schedule. You sent us our schedule several weeks ago. I mean, you sent us our schedule in October, I think. And I was looking at it yesterday while I was talking to Willy Claflin, and it seems like Willy has already planned out what he's going to tell in every single one of those sessions. I wait until I hear what the teller in front of me tells before I decide what story I'm going to tell. And it's gotten me, I've been doing this for a full time job for 20 years. And there's a lot less panic for me when something goes wrong. If somebody goes long, if somebody goes short, if something gets canceled, I'm like, well, I didn't have anything planned anyway, so it's not going to affect my plans. And then people who have everything planned out to the minute are like, oh no, what's going to happen now? So I'm not saying it's the best policy. I'm just saying it's worked for me.
Well, dumb gets you through sometimes.
It does. I believe that.
Well, I also think that humor is a big part of learning how to survive because we all sometimes take ourselves too seriously. And sometimes we have to kind of turn that off in order to get in touch with the fact that, hey, life happens and we can make it if we just hold on.
Yeah, and that I definitely subscribe to that attitude, and everybody in my family subscribes to that attitude, and we're one of those families that, um, like we're always, slamming each other, putting each other down, like around the supper table, just in a fun way, telling your mama jokes with my wife and my children's mama sitting right there. And that's how I was brought up. That's how all my cousins were brought up. I think it's how my dad and my uncles and my aunt were brought up. And what that does is, when the people closest to you are happy to point out your foibles in a humorous way, you have to accept the fact that maybe you're not as big as you think you are in your head. Like one of my favorite expressions, I'm not sure who said it, but somebody said, "Don't be so humble. You're not so great." And I think that that's really important for us to pay attention to. Like when I was little, not when I was little, when my kids were little, and I'm in the storytelling world, when I go to like the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, there's 10,000, 15,000 people there. And 1,500 of them, I'm fortunate to say, come to see me in a single tent. And when I walk down the street, people recognize me and they say hello and Bill Lepp. And, they'll say, I really enjoy your storytelling and you're so funny, blah, blah, blah. So when my kids were little, they thought I was famous. And I had to explain to them that I was famous, but only in a very, very small world, right? Like that's the one instance where storytellers know what it's like to be Brad Pitt or Angela Jolie. And as Willie and I say, you can't make it down the street in Jonesboro from one end of the town to the other end of town without 10 people stopping you. And I love it. I'm not complaining about that for 1 second. But then you go to the Burger King 1 block from where the National Festival is, and they have no idea who you are. So, uh, my kids finally figured out that, yeah, I'm not as famous as they thought I was when I was little. And now they point it out all the time. Now they're like grinding me down with the fact that you're really not that big of a big shot, Dad. We were wrong to begin with. And so, to get back to what I think was the original question, uh, by making fun of each other in our family, nothing mean, but by making fun of each other and kind of poking each other, it keeps us all humble. And it lets us know that, yeah, we do respect each other. And I'm very proud of my children and they know that. And, my wife's proud of them and we're proud of my wife. Everybody's proud of everybody. But you're only about 3 seconds away from some ridiculously cutting, sarcastic remark that's, going to bring you to your knees. And it doesn't help that my daughter's best friend lives across the street and is here half the time, and she's just as horrible about it as the rest of them, Sue.
Uh, well, I love it. It kind of keeps you grounded.
It does, yeah.
In my neighborhood, we call that playing the dozens.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. And I when I talk about survival, when I got out of college, I got a job working at a camp for kids who had what I like to call entered the begun their legal careers early. Uh, these were all kids who had been kicked out of school for one reason or another, and mostly they were great kids who had just been born to people who didn't have the resources to be good parents. And so these kids just made a lot of bad choices. But when it was going well, we'd have a group of 10 kids, and they were together sometimes up to a year, and they got to know each other and had a lot of fun with each other. And the kids were telling your mama jokes one time, and this poor little kid, Chris, he just didn't have it, right? Like, he just couldn't tell a good your mama joke. And he said to one of the other kids, this is my favorite your mama joke ever. He said, your mom is so fat, she tried to hula hoop in a Cheerio and it broke.
That's horrible.
I know, he thought he had him, like he thought he really cut him to the bone, and we were all just laughing, and Chris finally figured out we were laughing at him. But I don't know if that kid survived, but that kid had a tough life. But I know the kid who he told the mama joke to, that kid actually went on to, I think, be a manager, like a high-ranking manager at a big national furniture store chain. So, I hadn't even thought about that. Thanks for making me think about that. That was a good kid. So, but yeah, it's just there's just something about humor, as you said, and letting other people see that you're equally capable of making bad decisions that they are. When I'm in schools talking to kids about writing stories, I talk about how we love to laugh at other people getting hurt, which is why the show America's Funniest Home Videos has been on television for, I don't know, 30 years, right? You see some old lady walk out the front door, she goes to sit down on a chair and she misses, and she slides down the stairs because it's icy, hits the trash can, gets run over by a dump truck. And we're all thinking, we're laughing like she probably broke her hip, got arthritis, never walked again. But we think it's hilarious to see that happen,
Yeah, we do.
And so when you can point out to each other that you're just as involved and just as apt to fall down the stairs and get hit by a dump truck, it makes life easier.
Well, Bill, we are looking so forward to you coming to Midland, America. It's the best thing ever. We're celebrating 30 years this year.
That's great, yeah.
Of having a festival. So you will have a schedule that's a little bit different than what we've had in the past. But one of the places that you'll be going will be to our Manor Park residents and sharing a story. What do you think about as you're preparing stories for senior citizens as opposed to children, as opposed to teenagers? What goes on in your thought process?
I love telling at retirement homes or senior centers, whatever it is, to old people. Let's be frank about it. Let me just say this little one anecdote. I was in Oklahoma City, and they sent me to a retirement home to talk, and nursing home, retirement home. And the building was built like this. It was like a T. And so there were residences down the all four sides. And then in the middle of that T, like where my pinky's pointing, was like the common area. So that's where I was telling. It's also where the front doors were. And so it was me, and it was kind of a sort of a blue collar retirement home, right? This wasn't a swanky joint. And the doors opened up right in the middle of my story, and the paramedics came rushing in. 3 paramedics, 2 of them pushing a bed, and 1 of them in charge. And they ran down one of the 4 hallways. And I'm just telling stories the whole time. And then they ran back past me, still hadn't found their patient, down another hallway. And I'm still just telling stories. And then they come back and go down this hallway. And then they go down this hallway. And then they go to the front desk. And then the lead paramedic turns to the other 2 guys and he goes, "We're at the wrong retirement home." And they go racing out. So it's always exciting. But I was a pastor for 4 years, and therefore I did a lot of funerals. And uh, like the good at on Sunday morning, and I was good at doing funerals. The rest of being a pastor, oh, I wasn't that good at. I don't know why that is, but I was, one of my gifts and graces, as we say in the Methodist Church, um, lay in the death and dying situation. It's just something that I could deal with pretty well, and a lot of funny things happen at funerals. Um, and like I was gonna do a funeral for this one lady. My name is spelled Bil, obviously Bill, and her husband died. Her husband was just this amazing, amazing guy, and I had a good relate. Her name was Liz. I had a good relationship with her, and so he finally died, and she goes, "Preacher, I want you to do John's funeral," and I said, "Okay," and she said, "But I'm gonna put your name in the bulletin as Bill." I said, okay. She goes, because Bil is bile, and I don't want bile preaching my husband's funeral. Whatever you want, Liz. And then she goes, and now I seen you preach, and I know you're a good preacher and that you stand still. And I appreciate that, because I don't want nobody jumping over John's coffin and knocking it over and rolling him across the floor. So, these are the sorts of things that, I don't know, kind of behind the scenes funeral preparation. And then, of course, I tell this long story about how this one guy dies, and there's a lot of question as to whether he's going to heaven or hell. Like, everybody in the community knows this guy's made some bad decisions. And then at his funeral, well, I don't want to give it away because I might tell it to somebody who's watching this, but something really funny happens at the end of his funeral. um, and so I tell those stories at retirement homes because, and they usually really go over well, because you're with a group of people who are facing the fact that, you know, they're winding down to the last few years of their life. And as with everything we've been talking about, there's several ways to look at that. You can just dread the fact that you're almost out of time, or you can rejoice in the fact that you've had all this time before and still have some more time to come. So a lot of times uh, when I'm in front of audiences that are, senior, I tell death and dying stories. I mean, they're funny death and dying stories and funeral stories, because I think that's what's on those people's minds. And if you can help them uh, see that, yeah, you're dead and everybody's sad, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing, that there can't be some enjoyment in this whole thing, right? I mean, like, that's what we want as the family of someone who's passed away. We don't
Well,
want it to be an
yes,
absolutely miserable situation. We want to survive the fact that this person has died, um, and see the joy that we got out of their life. And it's
absolutely.
so uh, I really enjoy telling to people who are in that situation. Also, one of the neat things about retirement communities, senior centers, is just the amazing wealth of knowledge that you have in a place like that. You have people from all walks of life, people who were assembly line workers, who were ditch diggers, who were professors, who were, worked at NASA. You have everybody in there. So it's a really smart crowd. And my stories work best when it's a smart crowd. So, I really like having a diverse crowd. And I will say, I was again in Oklahoma City. They send you a lot of places in Oklahoma City, and I went to a senior center. It was like an adult daycare, I think they called it, and it was, um, if it was not 100%, it was 99% African American. And there was this little old lady sitting right in front of me, and I started telling a story, and it goes like, I have a dog, and my dog's name is Buck, but Buck ain't no ordinary dog. And I was going fast because that's usually what I do. But then I said, like, I have a dog. And she goes, mm-hmm. And I said, my dog's name is Buck. And she's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, and my dog can smell really well. And she was like, you tell it. And so, it was like this different rhythm that I wasn't used to. And I had to change the rhythm of my story to meet this lady who, was expressing the way what I assume she did in church or whatever.
Hmm.
And so that was really fun for me to be able to tell a story in a totally different pace, because a lot of times, we tell the same story thousands and thousands of times. And when we're forced to tell it in a different way, it becomes really exciting to us because we have to think about the story in a new way. So, there's always a new experience out there that you have to survive. See how I work
Ah, see how you work that back around to our theme? You go, Bill. Nobody can accuse you of being dumb. I don't care what you say.
Hold on a second. Let me calm my daughter down here. She can accuse me of being dumb.
Well, Bill, thanks for joining us today to talk about some survival stories. I'm going to be talking to some of your fellow tellers in a few moments with Willy Claflin and with Charlotte Blake Alston. And you all stay tuned. We'll be talking to them in a moment.
Great. And Willie and I have been fretting about this, how we were going to survive it. We've been texting back and forth, and I'm going to text him right now and tell him that it's a lot easier than we thought it was going to be.
I told you it was a piece of cake. Are y'all not believing me? I'm going to have to get some different glasses because y'all not believing me when I tell y'all stuff.
I believed you. Willie didn't.
Willie didn't believe me.
No.
Okay. Well, y'all stay tuned.
Okay. Thank you.
Talking to some of our master tellers about some of the awesome ways that they have used to be able to get through difficult situations. Now, you already know that a positive attitude, good humor, and a story work. So you can take the Dr. Roseberry is prescribing all of those things for you to help you get through a difficult time. We've talked with Bil Lepp, and my next master teller is a part of our festival and has been for many, many years. I don't remember the exact year that she started coming, but I can tell you that she has been woven into the fabric of our festival's existence. She's from Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, and I want you to welcome to the screen the one and only Charlotte Blake Alston. Hey, Charlotte.
How are you, Dr. Sue?
I done made myself a doctor. See, that's what you can do.
Yes, you can, but you offered some good elixirs there.
During difficult times, you get to choose how you're going to face it. How have you been during all of this crazy that has been our world of late?
Well, that's the operative phrase, what you just said. You can choose how to endure it, how to walk through it. So initially, when the lockdown hit, prior to that, I was actually in West Virginia. That was my last program with the Speak Story series that Adam Booth and his crew produces there in Charleston, West Virginia, Charlestown, West Virginia. But my son had been texting me. I was staying where I did not have a television set or radio. I wasn't really tuned into what was going on in the world in those few days. And my son kept texting me, have I gone shopping? Have I done this? Have I done that? Like, what are you talking about? I'm performing. So somebody else is feeding me. And then the morning that I was going to bring it back, he texted again and he sent me an image of people lined up around the block at a Costco's in Florida somewhere. And I thought, what in the world is going on? So I get home and he's bugging me again. You need to get something to eat. And so I said, I'll go shopping tomorrow. And I went, there's a market from me, only about 4 blocks away. And I thought, what is it, Christmas? There were cars parked in the gas pump area. Nobody parked over there. It's like Never Land near the railroad tracks. And went in, and of course, the experience that many people had, absolutely 0 bottles of water in the water aisle. No toilet paper, no paper towels in the paper aisle. And at one point, I was standing in line. I decided to cook because I've gotten lazy. I've been cooking for a long time, just cook and freeze. And so I bought real food, and I was standing in line, and I said out loud, people act like it's the apocalypse. And a young woman said, well, it is. And I said, well, if it's the apocalypse, you're not going to need no toilet paper where you going. So, choices about how to respond. And I've had some folks who freaked out initially with what are we going to do? And I had to remind them of that we can't control everything that happens to us in our personal lives, everything that happens to us in our families, in our communities, in our country, even in the world. All we can do and take control of is the choice we make in how to respond to it. So you can choose to run your blood pressure up. make yourself sick. You can choose to go into panic, fight, or flight mode and run adrenaline through your system and have your breath, feeling like you can't breathe and need to call EMTs. And things still aren't going to change.
Right.
You can choose to sit for a moment, maybe in silence, and just think, okay, what are the choices that I need to make now for my well-being, for the well-being of the people around me? So that was really my initial thought. And then I took the lockdown really as a gift of time. And I may have mentioned this to you before, but just only a few feet away from me is a closet where for 30 years, all my father's writings, his short stories, his rough drafts of his short stories, his essays, his newspaper columns, he had a column in our community news, but all of that had been sitting, waiting for me to record it, to document and write it down. And I looked up and 30 years went by and I still haven't done that. So I look at it as a gift of time to use to work on those things. And then after that, actually, I began to work. Some commissions began to come in for me. But just little things that I've chosen to do is, for those of us who are on the road a lot, for those of us who are on artist rosters, where you're up before the sun comes up to jump in your car, to get on the highway, to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours to a school, to the gym, the cafetorium to do a program. We don't have to do that now. So I can do it this way. I can just put a top on. I'm not going to show y'all what I got underneath. But I chosen to wake up when my body is ready to wake up. I let my body wake up when it's ready. So if that's 6 hours of sleep, that's 6 hours. If it's 9, then it's 9. So I make myself, it's almost like a ritual now. And the other thing about jumping up before the crack of dawn is you don't eat breakfast. So I'll grab a yogurt and that's in my car, and maybe an hour into my drive after the sun comes up on the highway, I'm in Newbury, with one hand on the wheel and eat some yogurt. I make myself a real substantive breakfast. So whatever I want. And for me, it tends to be what I call sort of a veggie scramble. So I saute up some Brussels sprouts, some broccoli, some bell pepper, some mushrooms. Whip up my eggs, throw them in there, might throw a little bacon in the microwave, if I want a biscuit or some grits. So I make a hearty breakfast for myself, and that happens between the time I wake up, whenever that is, and maybe 11. I also made a decision. The other thing that happens when you're on the road is you eat all the time. Restaurant food and hotel food, which is high in salt content and sugar content. So you're picking up weight. So I was at about 171 pounds. I'm only 5'5". When you wear loose clothing from the stage, you had a lot of sins. So I made the choice to drop that weight. That's just not a healthy weight for me. I had dropped 25 to 30 pounds actually back in 2005 or something. But I had done a program. I'd done LA weight loss, and nothing that I had done before in my 50s, 60s was working. So the seventh decade body behaves a little differently. Expect it if you're not in your seventh decade yet. It will happen. So I opted to try. It probably has some commercialized name, but extending my fasting period. So I generally eat now, since the lockdown, I only eat twice a day in terms of a solid meal. So I have that breakfast, and then I eat again a solid meal between 4 and 6. I do not eat a meal after 6 o'clock. If I need a snack, it'll be applesauce or something light. If I have a craving, my downfall is salt and crunch chips. I hold it to the weekend to satisfy that craving, and I'm done. But it took me about 4 months, but I lost 22 pounds. Now I put 8 back on, but that's because I yielded to temptation a little too much with some things. But so I decided to do that as well. Also, walking is the other thing. I live only 15 minutes, and I only discovered that a few years ago. I've lived here in this area all my life. And I'm 15 minutes from, it's the first, it's no longer the only, but the first in-city wildlife refuge in the country. It's only a 15-minute drive from my house near Philadelphia International Airport. So it's just, and they've remained open through the entire pandemic. So you couldn't, the first 6 months or so, you couldn't drive your car into it. You had to park on the street and walk all the way in. The bathrooms were closed. You had to go before you go, you know. But they've kept their all except one narrow one where people could not distance. But other than that, it remained open. And it was just wonderful to go there sometimes, particularly on a Saturday or Sunday, and whole families were there with their children on their little bicycles and being able to run. People greeting each other as they passed by distance. So that was the other thing. I, started to kind of focus on some of the projects, like what the work with my dad that I put off. Some of that too was looking at family genealogy, particularly on my mother's side of the family. And our elder just turned 93 in August. So those memories that she has of that family history are not going to be there forever. And they're coming more slowly now as well. So she's still living on land that has been in our family since pre-emancipation. So I've done some research into that, hit some dead ends, but it means I'm going to have to drive down there to the courthouse and see what I can find. But we were able to visit Abigail's, her name, in the summer of 2019, before all of this happened. My son and I were able to spend some time with her and document some of the things. So that's how I've been looking at this, using this time.
Well, now, both of us, as I like to say, are on the plus side of 20. So this is not our first rodeo with the difficult times. So we've been through some crazy times before. And can you remember what it was that you were able to tap into that got you through?
Gosh, when I was thinking about this conversation, I actually was thinking of my parents and my grandparents, and so I'll circle back to our parents and our grandparents collectively. But now that you've mentioned that, I hadn't even thought of myself. I guess it would have been the '60s. I'm a child of the '60s, and a lot of what was happening on our college campus during that time, living through a period when you were watching, I'm not from the South, my grandparents are, but, up here in Philadelphia, but it was around the time when you started to see on your television screens, because reporters from primary news sources, and primarily then it was newspapers and just the three major networks, were traveling to the South to document what was going on down there. And you're seeing people being beaten and seeing children being hosed and dogs attacking people and that sort of thing. And I think what happened was a collective sense of a need to come together as a community. And at that time, we were students, college students. Also, the war in Vietnam was raging at that time as well. But that feeling that we had a collective goal. We were on a historically Black college campus, and at that time didn't have a single course in African American or African history and culture. So we were kind of, I'm class of '69, and we were kind of rabble rousers from the time we were freshmen. We actually marched on the dean's house, on the house of the dean of women. And we were freshmen at one point. But I think it was that sense of camaraderie, that sense of community, that sense that we're all in this together, and we have a goal, and we're going to make sure that we work towards seeing that to fruition. When I go back to my parents, grandparents' generation, if you don't have to think that hard to take a look at times when we as a nation, and not just us, but other citizens of the world in Europe had to tighten their belts and had to sacrifice during a time of oppression through 2 world wars. Yeah. I recently crafted a work for University of North Carolina, but it's called The 688, and it's a story of the first ever, first only, and ever since, all Black female, of course, WAC battalion to be allowed to serve on European soil during World War II. It was the 6,888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. They called themselves the 688. So in doing the research for the 688, I'm researching what was happening at that time, what happened prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, what happened after that, And once the United States declared war on the Nazi regime of Germany and the regime of Italy, men were needed on multiple fronts. They needed men in the Pacific, in Asia, in Japan, and on multiple battlefronts throughout Europe, in England, in France, all over. So men were gone. And there was a sense that the rest of us had to pull together. So there were rations. People had ration cards. You couldn't buy sugar, you couldn't buy milk, you couldn't buy cheese without a ration card. And eventually the government issued ration books. And once they were ready to be sent out, something like 96% of Americans had a ration book. So whenever you went to buy, your canned goods or whatever it was, they would make the mark in your ration book. So there was a slogan that said, "We use less, so they," meaning the men on the battlefronts, "can have more." So we've had a time in our history when we pulled together as a nation and sacrificed. Sacrifice. It's a word that we seem to have a difficult time with in our generation. We have a few generations of Americans who have never had to sacrifice in the way that our parents and grandparents had to sacrifice for the good of everyone in our country. We don't get taught that history, number one. And we seem not to, I don't know whether it was Booker T. Washington or who to attribute it to, but it's not to know is bad. Not to want to know is worse. Not to want to look at the times when we've been through challenge before collectively as a nation to see how we got through those. That's the purpose that stories serve. And history are stories of the human journey, of our actual human. They're not myth. They're not made up. They're the actual stories of how human beings got through challenges collectively.
Yeah, and you just kind of segued into what I was going to ask you next, which was, what is the role of the storyteller or the griot in being able to sustain and hold on to the history so that we can tell those stories?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is reminding us stories that remind us of where we have come from. And if you look at you and me, you know that struggle has always been a big part of our journey in this country. So we have had to struggle and we've had to sacrifice to achieve whatever we're and still do to a large extent. So reminding people, reminding the community of those stories, once again, of history, of those who worked hard, who struggled, who hit roadblocks, who were knocked down, who were jailed, who were hosed, who whatever it was, and they stood back up and again collectively continue to work towards achieving those goals and seeing them to fruition. So those stories of history, and there are many stories in various cultures throughout the world.
Right.
The folk lore, which is really the collective embodiment of the human struggle, if you really take a folk tale and analyze it. So those are the teachings that have been handed down through millennia through the folk stories. One that comes to mind for me is a story from Senegal that they call Kumba Amde and Kumba Amundu. Kumba with a mother, Kumba without a mother. And it may just look like a simple good sister, bad stepsister story, but there's far more to it. And what happens in the story, what gets repeated in the story, are these essential human qualities that this child who goes through this test is reminded to hold on to and manifest. So I think one of the things that helps us as human beings is to manifest those qualities we have been granted when we come into the world. Those qualities of integrity and honesty and character and empathy and courage in the face of difficulty. So in the language of the Wolof, it's Yaru, Yatu, Sutra, Mun, kindness, respect, patience, those things. And it is in the story the memory, the spirit of her deceased mother. In many of these stories, there's a motif where if a child is going through challenge, a spirit, and it's usually a deceased ancestor, who appears to the child and reminds them of these things. And so she takes those into consideration and she manifests those at each really crazy, wild thing that she encounters. The contrast is that the stepsister goes, she returns from a place where nobody has returned from to restore what has been broken. When the stepsister sees this, she manifests none of those qualities, and it doesn't turn out right. So it's a reminder to all who hear it, not just children, the adults, that we can take what has been imbued right within us and manifest that to overcome challenges. My favorite story from this, I call it YP, 2020, 2021 YP, year of the pandemic, is a story that happened right close to home. And that morning, the other thing I've done is turn off TV and media. That I'll get the news. Somebody will text me and tell me something I don't want to hear.
If it's really important.
It was really important, yeah. So, because so much is flavored with ideology and someone's personal editorial commentary. You know, people tell you it's a terrible day because it's raining. Well, I don't think the grass thinks that is terrible. You know, we put a judgment on everything. It's raining. It's supposed to rain. So we're in trouble if it does not rain. But that morning, if I don't make it to the wildlife refuge, I walk through my borough. So I do a little 2-mile loop. And that morning, there were images, I had the TV on, there were images of children in adult bodies who were in pickup trucks and had, you know, weapons of war going to a state house in a certain state to threaten the governor because they wanted to go out and play. They wanted to go out and go bowling or drinking. And so later, I take a walk through my borough. I get about halfway through, and it's several blocks where the houses are set back off of the sidewalk, the steps, and then a long path. But in the grassy part of the curb, there was a sign. It was an easel, a child's easel. And it had written on it, free jokes. And so I went a little farther, a couple houses down, up on the landing at the fourth step, there was a little guy who was holding a sign, would you like a free joke? So he looked to be 7, maybe second grader, about 7 years old. And his mom had a joke book. He would pick a page. And so I got actually 2 jokes for the price of none. So I got 2, and I traded jokes with him. He got some jokes for me as well. So the jokes were, what do you call a stick that doesn't come back? No, I just gave away the answer. What do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? And the answer is a stick. The second joke was, why was the math book so sad? Because he had too many problems. So, okay, you just laughed, and I'm watching this laugh as well. Here's a little guy who's out of school. No after-school activities, no Boy Scout, no Cub Scouts, no T-ball, no birthday parties, no socializing with friends. What does he choose to do? He chooses to figure out something he can do to lift his neighbor's spirits. Mm. A week or 2 later, there was a posting on our borough's Facebook page that he would be stationed at the entrance to one of our parks 2 nights a week, giving free jokes. This is a child. Yeah. So not been tainted by political ideology. He's not, doesn't realize we're supposed to go off in corners with our boxing gloves and beat each other up if we disagree or we look different or think differently. Just from the pure spirit place of a child. And what he came, those qualities that he came into the world with, he chose to manifest for his neighbors, not just for himself. He could have just told his sister and brother jokes, but made the choice to come outside of his house and offer something to lift his neighbor's spirits. That's my favorite from the page.
That is so good. And you know what? A little child shall lead them.
Absolutely. Every single time, it seems.
That is so good. Charlotte, thank you for being with us to talk about survival stories for a minute. And you know what? Charlotte is going to be part of the lineup.
I am.
The ensemble lineup for our Midland Storytelling Festival. We are celebrating 30 years of existence this year. Woo, woo, woo,
awesome.
woo, woo.
Awesome.
So we got a few survival stories of our own, and we hope that everyone will join us to hear wonderful stories from our amazing lineup of tellers. I'm going to cut away in just a few moments and talk with Willy Claflin and hear from him about survival stories. But Charlotte, before we let you go, can you tell the people why you love coming to Midland America so much?
Midland America is one of the most hospitable places on the earth. Even if the land is flat, the hospitality is not. It is full and ebullient, and people look forward to us coming, and we look forward to coming and sharing with the residents of the Midland area.
That's great. So, hey, everybody, stay tuned with us. I'm going to put on my glasses and figure out how I can get Willie up in the building, and we'll talk with you all later. Stay tuned.
Thanks so much.
Listen, we are having a fabulous time talking about survival stories. And if you didn't know, now you know that stories, humor, and a real positive attitude is what it takes to really get us through difficult times. And we've all had them. And if you don't believe me, perhaps you will believe our next guest. He's been coming to Midland for some time as part of the ensemble lineup for our Midland Storytelling Festival, which is celebrating 30 years this year, as I've already mentioned. And Willy Claflin has become a part of the fabric of our festival. We look forward to seeing him every year, along with his wonderful sidekick, Maynard the Moose, and some of his other friends. So I want you to now welcome to this conversation the incomparable Mr. Willy Claflin. Hey, Willy.
Hey, Sue, congratulations on turning 30.
Oh, to be
That's
30.
incredible. Yeah, just incredible.
Yeah, and you've been with us a lot of those years.
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember how because I only remember stories anymore.
Well, that's pretty good. Willie, how have you been surviving the world shutdown? I don't even like to call it the pandemic anymore.
Yeah.
Give Corona a name. How have you been surviving?
Well, it's kind of for me like it's been for a lot of other performers I know. All of a sudden, the door just slammed shut. And in fact, I was about to do my favorite house concert of the year here in San Francisco the day before the city shut down. And I'd worked for, a couple months. It's because it's one of my favorite events. Dear friends of mine put it on. And it's not a big deal, but it's all the near and dear storytellers and everybody. And so about 48 hours ahead of that, we just were told we had to shelter in place. And it was kind of like walking up, against a plate glass door when you don't know there's a door there because the glass is so clean. You think you're just kind of walk through the doorway and pow. Um, so it kind of knocked me for a loop. And then, like a lot of other performers, I thought, well, what am I going to do with all this material I was just about to present? And that's still my question. Um, and then I was put back all of a sudden into the land of my childhood because I grew up a very solitary solo child who in my adult life was so used to all my storytelling buddies, all my friends, all the folks in the audiences around the country just kind of carried up like crowd surfing, on all these people's friendship and love and good wishes. And all of a sudden, I'm just there in my room. Um, I was an only child. Grew up in the woods. Never really fit in at school because I was the kid that wore glasses and read books. And so my childhood, I would basically either go walking in the woods or I'd retreat to my room and I'd read and I'd make up imaginary worlds and I'd play with my stuffed animals, which of course I still do because I've got Maynard Moose and all his buddies. And that was great in a way, but I so much missed the human contact. I just really did. And so I went through a period of, first being grateful that sheltering in place, I had a place to shelter in because so
Yeah.
many folks didn't. But then just kind of feeling bereft and kind of slogged through. And then there was all the surrounding political controversy, which we try to stay away from during festivals to give folks a break. But then there was what I guess you would call the politics of retribution kind of set in on both sides. And at those points, I would kind of, in my imagination, I'd leave my room and I'd climb up and have a seat, listen to the Sermon on the Mount. And I'd find out I'd be reminded of what we were told about the religion of retribution. And I would reminded if somebody sues me for my jacket, give them my coat. And if somebody hits me upside the head, well, no, maybe not hit him back 10 times as hard, maybe turn the other cheek if I could do that. And then maybe, much as I love those I love, oh, the tough one is love your enemies.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, I didn't come to, knock down what you've been told. I came to amplify it. Well, he kind of said, no, you've been told this. I'm telling you this. Are you with me? I'd go, oh, yeah, I guess so.
Well, you're talking about introspection and thinking back to a time when you were younger and things that you have gone through. Neither of us are in our 20s. So we have lived through some difficult times before. What are some tough times that you can remember that happened previously that you survived?
Yeah, and especially, I want to be able to talk about politics without talking about politics, so I'm going to do that. One of the earliest memories I have is of the country being bitterly, bitterly divided, people turning in their friends, reporting on each other, convinced that the other side was essentially the enemy, if not the devil. I grew up listening to the McCarthy hearings on the radio with my dad. And I watched storytellers and musicians and actors and just good folks of all kinds lose their work because they had been accused of something that couldn't be proved, that they were communists. And my beloved Pete Seeger, This Land Is Your Land, who I had loved as a kid, all of a sudden he couldn't find work anymore because he wouldn't answer their questions during the probe. And having seen the nation come through that, and out the other side is the thing that gives me hope, because I haven't seen anything like the polarization and the fear since I was 8, 9, 10 years old. And I did see us come out the other side. And I was thinking about that too. The division, I thought, there's a wonderful story about Solomon and the baby. And when baby's about to be cut in half, the real mom pops up. And I'm hoping that in terms of Mother America, that the real Mother America will step up just about that time the sword's about to come down, and we will step forward and see who we really are.
Yeah. And I think that when we're going through difficult times, stressful times, it doesn't always help to ignore it. We try to ignore it and act like it's not really there.
But it's there, along with COVID and everything. The polarization and it's broken families apart, and I've seen us come through this before. I've had arguments with people I thought I wasn't going to see again years ago, over some misunderstanding. And I like to go back to my memories of small town life, which is where even though I live in San Francisco, I'm only really at home in a small town. Because in a small town, if somebody gets stuck in the mud, stuck in the snow, you pull them out. You know them as neighbors way before you have any notion of what their abstract beliefs might be, And so whatever your day-to-day interaction with them is, loving your neighbor, it kind of overrides all this abstract. Well, I heard that somebody told me that they saw this thing on Facebook and by gosh, I'm mad. Well, that's like information at about 6 removes. But if your neighbor comes up and says, I understand that Maud is sick, you go bring Maud some food,
Yeah, because Maud does need to eat.
Yep, even if she doesn't go to church, even if she might be of the other political party, she still gets to eat. You know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
simpler than we make it, I think. I hope.
Well, I believe that it's simpler than that. As a storyteller, what do you think our responsibility
Yeah.
is to helping to get people through these difficult times?
Well, it's interesting because most of the storytelling I do is comical in nature, either with or without the moose. And of course, people are brought together by being in an audience and by laughing, which really hasn't been possible for so long. And that's basically all I know how to do. If people sing together, if everybody sings, then you kind of have brought everybody together, whatever they might think. I look forward to being able to do that again in person. You know about shape note singing, sacred harp singing, the early way of teaching music.
Mhm.
I went to it's well, go into a short explanation, but it's just an old way of teaching music back in the colonial days, using various shapes instead of the actual notes. And there are these shape note conventions. They're hymns. They're mostly old English songs, which had religious words put to them. But I went to the National Shape Note Convention, and it's 400 people. They all sing. There's four different groups: bass, baritone, and the two groups on the sides, and four-part harmonies. Half of that group were Southern Baptist folks in their 70s and 80s. The
Mhm.
other half of that group were young Jewish kids from New York City. If you had even tiptoed into the politics of that group, you would have found the most right and the most left wing humans in the country. And no one mentioned that they all sang together, 400 voices. I've never heard anything like it. So there's that.
There's common ground.
There's common ground, and yeah, because we're human beings. And the other thing about survival too, I think, is just in isolation to be able to remember and record. And this thing that Donald Davis said once popped into my mind. He was doing a workshop on family stories, and he was somewhat irritated. He talking on the phone. He said, "They want me to name this something fancy. It's about family stories. No one will be interested. They wanted me to give it a fancy title." So I got mad. I said, "Okay, How to Kill Grandma." He said, popped into my mind. I just said it. And they said, "Great, that's perfect." And then he thought to himself, "Well, how am I going to make that make sense?" And then he said, "I'll tell you how it makes sense. You can kill grandma by never telling any stories about her.
Mm.
You can kill your ancestors and you can kill history by never telling any stories about it, because then it just goes away. But if you can remember and you can tell, then all the old lessons come through, even like in the fairy tales where, you learn as a kid. I did on, European fairy tales that when you're walking through the woods and there's a poor old woman by the side of the road, you don't kick her out of the way. If you want to finish the quest, you give her the bread and water you got. She says, "Oh, well, thanks a lot, Willie. Oh, by the way, here's a cloak of invisibility." And when you hear the words doormat, turn to your left. Thanks a lot. And then you're never aware of this as a kid. But if there's a message, you don't want to boil things down to a message, but the message is clear. If you stop and listen to the old woman by the side of the road, who's got the history of the whole community in her mind, and if you're kind to her, she will give your history, your wisdom, of your culture, of your people, will give you the magic you need to fulfill whatever your personal quest is. So I turn back to traditional stories. And for my
Uh,
own salvation, I sing with friends. For a while I was at considerable distance. But
yeah.
singing, you breathe, you smile, you make noise, joyful or complaining. Sing the blues.
What's a song that comes to mind that helps you to get through?
Um, well, it's a song my son Brian wrote that we did at Jonesboro, just called "Walk It With You."
Can you hum a few bars?
Yeah. Well, I know that it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And I know you might have a heavy load, but I can carry some too. I will shine a light in the darkest hour. It goes on like that. You can get it on YouTube. But walk it with you is great, because I didn't say walk it. No, I'll walk it with you, but I won't walk it with you. That means you, whoever you is, I'll walk.
Ah, that's powerful right there. To know that we have something that we can share with somebody, even a
Yeah.
song.
Just walking,
Yeah,
just listening, just talking.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's something really powerful about communication, and that's what the Storytelling Festival is really all about. We get an opportunity to share stories that help us to build bridges between us and recognize that we're not so different after all. And the problems that you share, I share, we all going through it together. And maybe, just maybe, if we think about it and focus on working together, we'll get through it and come out all right on the other side. Willie, you're coming to Midland in
I
a
am.
very short time,
Yeah.
and we're looking forward to having you. So, what is the thing that you remember most about the joy of being part of this ensemble?
Well, this festival is unlike others in that it's pretty much the same crew that come back year after year. That's what makes it so special. There's nothing wrong with festivals that want to change every year to make sure that variety is the spice of their program. But there's so much variety within these 7 or 8 people anyway. For me, it's seeing the people again, seeing folks from Midland, seeing my storytelling friends again. It's like kind of a reunion. This is the first live festival after COVID that I've been able to go to, and that means more to me than I can even say.
It means a great deal to us too. We love having you here every single year.
Yeah.
And we're glad that you and Maynard make the
Oh,
trip.
Maynard, yeah, he'll definitely be there. Yeah.
Well, we're excited about it, and we want to invite all of you to be a part of our Midland Storytelling Festival. We've talked about survival stories with Bil Lepp, Charlotte Blake Alston, and Willy Claflin, but let me tell you, there are more storytellers lined up as part of this ensemble, and we'll be hearing from Donald Davis, Laura Pershing Rayner, Antonio Hasha, Barbara McBride Smith, and some emerging youth tellers. So we want you to plan now to tune in virtually on Basin PBS, wherever it is viewed. You'll be able to see our Family Fun Night live from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. That broadcast will feature our youth tellers, Willy Claflin, Bil Lepp, Laura Pershing Rayner, and Donald Davis. It'll be emceed by Barbara McBride Smith. And then on Saturday, all day, we will have an in-person opportunity for you to come and be part of our storytelling festival to celebrate 30 with us. It wouldn't be great without you. We'll be at the Bush Convention Center, downtown Midland. You can find it, and we want you to come at 10 o'clock, 11:15, and then at 7 o'clock p.m. There'll be a big old-fashioned oleo that will feature all of these master tellers sharing stories with you that will warm your heart and tickle your funny bone. I can promise you that. I want to thank Willie, Laura, and Bill for joining me for Survival Stories. We got one last few minutes, and I'm going to let Willie share with us, what have you survived recently that has been a particular booger for you? What have you gotten through recently?
Well, recently, I'm about to get hearing aids because my hearing has deteriorated significantly in the last few months. At the same time that happened, my wife pretty much lost her voice. She's gaining it back again, but some old operations long ago that required intubation damaged her vocal cords. So you can imagine the complexity. Of course, domesticity is hard enough as it is, and an interesting challenge to all of us who've been married a long time to our dearly beloved spouse. But when you can't hear and your wife can't speak, it adds a certain level of challenge to the communication process. But her voice is getting better and my ears are getting better, and I'm sure soon we will communicate perfectly.
Well, in the meantime, I guess you'll get to use sign language, something similar to what we're going to do now for all of you, and understand that this means bye-bye. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the Midland Storytelling Festival. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tell everybody. Thank you for watching.